Okay. Okay, we are on the very bottom actually of I'm in base, I think. Yes, yes. The pay hey kid, right? Okay, pay hey I'm in base.
No, that was Jack Creekhouse. Hey, hey.
Uh-huh.
You like that?
I don't know, I guess.
Say that.
All right, okay, okay. So we're three lines, I think three lines before the, oh no, four lines to be the last word on the line. Yeah. I just have to warn you, I'm a little wiped out from taking the red eye, so I may not be as my economics professor used to say, I may not be able to give my usual 42%. All right. What were you talking about? This is, I enjoy this. This is nice. This is mine. My children bought this for me. This is like very special. Impacted by the. Yes. Yes, yes. Give me the full treatment. The full treatment. Okay. Amarav, so we have really three different issues today. One issue is when a can of the kalim of the lokeach, of the purchaser, enable him to purchase the merchandise, even when the kli is being filled up in the reshus, in the possession of the mocher, or do we say no, that it would become batal to the reshus of the mocher, and therefore there is no transfer of the merchandise as long as they are still in the seller's domain? Second question is, if you have a small item of merchandise that can easily be lifted and you can buy it through hagbah, you also have the ability to acquire it through meshicha, through pulling it from the possession of the mocher into the possession of the lokeach or some other neutral possession or domain. And third question is, when you fill up the measures, do we say that in every single case, the lokeach purchases a little bit at a time, or is it possible for the mocher to pull out of the transaction until the entire measure has been filled up? So we'll start with the first issue. Tashma. If the donkeys and the workers are carrying presumably bags of merchandise, the merchandise will generally be fruits of the earth of some sort, and now they're unloading the merchandise into the domain of the lokeach, presumably the purchaser. The chnisan the tok beso, they bring the merchandise. They haven't yet unloaded it from the back of the donkey or from the shoulders of the workers, but they're inside of the house. So if they're already inside the house, if there already was a stipulation of what the price would be per unit, even though they didn't measure everything, like when we sell the chametz, as we mentioned, so it's considered to be a good sale, even though we haven't measured out every single unit, because we say that we've stipulated that the price is going out. Opinion of the domain of the purchaser that was made quite yet at this point in time, because it's still on top of the backs of the back of the donkey, or it's still on the shoulders of the workers. Pirkon, but if they actually emptied it, they actually unloaded the merchandise. And now the merchandise is sitting on presumably the floor of the purchaser's home, and is inside of the bags. We're assuming that the merchandise was inside of bags. So in this case, if they made the stipulation, even though they haven't yet measured every single unit, but they know what the price is per unit, so then we say in this case, since there's a kinyan of the reshus of the domain, neither one is allowed to retract. But if they only measured the number of units, but they didn't actually stipulate a price, so then since there wasn't a price stipulated, the seller could say, oh, I didn't know you wanted it for so cheap. The purchaser could say, I didn't know that you wanted it for so expensive, for so dear, and therefore they can both back out until they're able to agree upon a price or a system for appraisal, as the case may be. So then Shneyan Yecholin Laxor Bahen. So we see from here, we didn't qualify when we said that if the goods are down on the ground of the lokeach, even though they are still inside of the bags in which they were brought, and those bags we know belong to the mocher, nonetheless, the purchaser's domain acquires the goods for him, at least when they stipulated a price. So we see from here that the fact that the kalim belong to the mocher is irrelevant. We just look at whose domain it's in. With the kalim the mocher b'shus lokeach lokana. So we see from here that if the kalim of the mocher that are in the rishus of the lokeach, there's a missing word here, which completely changes the meaning of what it seems to say. Lokana mocher, that the mocher is not considered to override the transaction because the goods are in his utensils. Rather, despite the fact that the goods are in his utensils, lokana mocher, the mocher does not continue to hold on to the items. Rather, they're considered to be transferred to the lokeach. Very important missing word. Kalev de lokeach nami v'shus mocher lokana. So it should also follow that when you have the utensils of the lokeach, if it's in the domain of the mocher, all we care about is the domain, not who the utensil that the goods are located in belong to. So even if the lokeach's utensils are, even if you have the lokeach's utensils that the merchandise is placed into by the mocher in the mocher's domain, since it's still the mocher's domain, we don't care that it's lokeach's utensil, lokana. We're going to look at the domain rather than the utensil. Since it's the mocher's domain, the merchandise has not been transferred. So that seems to be the proof. That's the proof that's brought by Rava. And Rava was very proud that he brought such a convincing proof. And it's important to validate a rabbi when they bring like a good proof. But Rava was not validated here. Amar of Nachman by Yitzchak. From Nachman by Yitzchak said, nah, what are you talking about? Who says that there were any kalim here? Did it say there were kalim? It just said the merchandise was on at the top of, was on the back of the donkey or was being carried by the workers. Who said they wasn't necessarily in a kli altogether. They probably had it not in a utensil, and they just took the merchandise directly and put it down and spilled the merchandise down onto the floor of the lokeach. So of course lokeach acquired it, but had the merchandise been in the utensils of the moker, then the lokeach would not have acquired it, because we look at the utensil and not look at the domain. So Ikbid Rava. So Rava was very offended by this. Rava said, hey, I just brought this knockout proof, and here you are, just taking the wind out of my sails. Midei shafchan ketani. It doesn't say that they spilled out the merchandise. It said pirkan ketani, very polite word. They gently placed down the merchandise. You don't gently place down the merchandise unless the merchandise is in a bag. So it was clearly in a bag. It was in some utensil that belonged to the mocher, but we don't care about who the bag belonged to. We care about the fact that it's lokeach's domain. And so too, if it would be in the mocher's domain, we wouldn't care. If it would be the lokeach's utensil, it still would not be transferred to the lokeach because it's still in the mocher's domain. So the Pirkan Ketani. Ella Amar Baravashi b'misachli detumi. So Ma Baravashi said that what we're talking about over here is that it could be that the merchandise wasn't necessarily spilled out, but nonetheless, it could be that we're talking about the type of merchandise which does not come in bags. We could say that it was bundles. Bundles are also placed gently down on the ground. They're not spilled per se because they are bundled together, but they're still not inside of a bag. It could be that these were bundles of garlic. They don't come in bags, they come in bundles. So therefore, there's still not a proof for what Rava said. So Amalei Huna braid the Marzutra the Ravina. So Huna braid Marzutra, they said to Ravina, wait a second. Mikte Pirkan Ketani. Since we're talking about when they're unloading the merchandise, placing it on the floor that belongs to the lokeach, Mali Pasuk, Mali Lo Pasuk. So who cares whether they actually stipulated a price or not? If it's being placed on the floor of the lokeach should purchase it. So we know that doesn't make any sense because we've already explained why you need pasuk. So Amalei pasuk some kadaite, lo pasuk, lo some kadaite. No, even though the merchandise might already be on the floor of the lokeach's domain, there still is not a smichas das, there's no gemiras das, so there is no absolute intention on the part of the seller and the purchaser to complete the sale until they have agreed upon a price. So Amalot le Ravina le Ravashi. Ravina brings to Ravashi another potential proof. Tashma of this proposition, namely that the kalim of a lokach would not enable him to purchase the merchandise if it's still in the domain of the mocher. The Rav Shmuel Damri to Ravayu, Rav and Shmuel said as follows: Caleb shel Adam kone lo b'chol makom. So here, maybe this proves the opposite. That since Rav and Shmuel said a person's utensils enable him to acquire merchandise wherever they are. What do you mean wherever they are? It can't be wherever. It must come to include something special, not only the lokach's domain, but not only in, let's say, a simta, but in some other domain where you would not have expected that the lokach would acquire. Lasuye mai, lav lasuye v'shus mocher. Doesn't this come to include the case where the merchandise is placed out in some sort of a rishus that belongs to somebody, namely the rishus mocher? I wouldn't have thought that the lokach could acquire it, but Rav and Shmuel Makadesh, if it's in lokach's utensils, he acquires the merchandise. This would seem to go against Rava. So Amalei, so Rabashi says, no, of course, a lokach can acquire merchandise in the seller's domain if the seller says explicitly that he wants him to do so. That's talking about the Amalei Zil Kani. Zil Kani, different story. Mocher says to Lokach, go and buy the merchandise. It's all yours inside of your utensil. Of course that works. The question that we're posing is when the Mocher did not say Zil Kani. The Mocher did not say Zil Kani. We still have an unresolved question. Some poskim say we assume it doesn't work. Others say it's still a Safek Ladina. So therefore we can't say for sure that it does work. So according to halacha, the way that you would acquire it is by picking it up, doing a king and hagbah. That you could do even in the mocher's domain. Everybody agrees that king and hagbah would work. The question is about more of a king and mashicha, that where you're not actually picking it up, it's just like being put into your utensil, or you're just pulling it away. So if you're pulling it away, that can work, but not while you're still in the seller's store. You only acquire the item once you drag the item, take the item outside of the seller's store, then you've made a king in Mashiach. But otherwise, the way that you would have to do would be a king in Akba, unless the Mocher says, here, it's yours, you have hereby acquired this item. If he says Zil Kani, that's the way that it would work in most stores, that you would have a Zil Kani. The question is, if you would not have a Zil Kani. It's not awesome. So we have a Mishnah that says over there, we're over there in Kiddushin, if I have nechasim that come with responsibility, that if they're taken away, the seller has to make good, namely karka, real estate. So then they can be acquired through the payment of money, through a quick claim deed, or through a king and chazaka, that somebody digging or doing work on the real estate. She'elan achrayis, if it's possessions that are personal movable property, for which the seller does not take responsibility, they only can be acquired through taking the item away from the seller's domain into the purchaser's domain or into some shared domain. So there's an addendum to this, which was taught in a surah in the name of Rav Chisda. The Rav Chisda, the Pumpadisa, they taught this supplement Masnula Mishmei Rav Kahana. They taught it either in Rav Kahana's name or in Rav's name. What was this addendum? The addendum was Lo Shanu Ladram Shein Darkan Lagbia. That's only if it's the sort of thing that's not typically lifted up. About Dram Shedarkan Lagbia. But if it's just a small pocket watch or something, which people typically would pick up and they wouldn't drag on the ground from the store to the outside, they would just pick it up. So then, then it can only be acquired through Hagbah and not through Meshicha. There's a whole big deal about what if it's not something that would be typically picked up because it's a little on the heavy side. So you would typically just kind of like pull it from one domain to the other, but you happen to pick it up. You're very strong and you decided that you're going to pick it up and lift it in the air. Would that be a good kinyan? So the Rashbam and Tosfos assume, of course, that would be a good kinyan because Hagbah always works. There's this little comment by Rabbeinu Gershom at the very bottom of the daf where he seems to indicate, no, the same way that we would assume that if you could do it through Hagbah, Meshicha doesn't work. So if you don't normally do it through Hagbah and you do it through Meshicha, then Hagbah wouldn't work. But that's not the way we assume. We'll assume that Hagbah always works. But the question is, if it's the sort of thing that would typically only be done by Hagbah, does Meshicha work? So this supplement to this Mishnah that was articulated by either Rav Chisda or Rav Kahana or Rava. They said that if it's typically done through Hagbah, then Mashiach does not work. So Yosef Abaye. So Abaye asked the following. He was sitting and he was learning this sugya. So Ravada bar Matna asked the following question. He posed the kasha. He said, what about the case of a person who steals a wallet on Shabbos, right? That famous case, person steals a wallet on Shabbos. How would you, if you were stealing a wallet on Shabbos, how would you do it? What would you do? First, you'd pick up the wallet, and then you would run out as quickly as you could from the domain of the owner of the wallet. You'd run for your life, right? So you pick up the wallet and you run out. So before you've run out from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim, you've already picked up the wallet, so you're already chayev to make restitution. When you run out with the wallet from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim, you have incurred the death penalty because that's a malacha of hotzah. This is before they started building Erevin all over the place. And it's a Rishus HaRabim deraisa, and Erev wouldn't even work. So you would be guilty of hotzah, but nonetheless, even though we have a principle of kimle b'derabba minei, that if you become guilty of capital punishment at the same moment in time, that you also would incur an obligation to pay money for whatever you did. So then we only require you to receive the death penalty, but you and your estate are not obligated to pay that amount of money. But here, if the person lifted up the wallet before he committed the malacha of hotzah, so he already had acquired it, because Hagbah is koneh, even in the reshus of the mocher. So Hagoneh kis b'Shabbos chayev, shkvan is chayev b'gneva kodim sheyavu l'dei yisur Shabbos. He already incurred the obligation of restitution of Geneva before he committed the capital crime of the Yisur Shabbos. But if he's dragging out the item, he's doing it through a kinyan meshicha, so then he only acquires the item at the very moment that it goes outside into the Rishus HaRabim. Megara v'yotzei, Pater Sharei Isser Shabbos Ugeneva Boing Ke'echad, because in this case the Isser Shabbos and the Isser Geneva, they both came at the same time. How could he possibly have a kinyan Mashiach in the Rishus HaRabim? Okay, so we'll say that it was Sidei Rishus HaRabim according to the opinion that Sidei Rishus HaRabim you can make a kinyan in, and it also counts as Rishus HaRabim for purposes of Shabbos, or he put it in the small space where he has his hands, so he had a kinyan yad within Rishus HaRabim. We can get out of that question. But a big question that we're asking now is, Barei kiss to Baragbahu. Kiss is something, a wallet is something that's easily lifted, right? That's why we call it shoplifting. You can lift it. It's something that you can easily lift in the air. So how is it that it's possible to effectuate then a kinyan mashicha with respect to this wallet? Like we're talking about the fellow who's dragging it outside, who has a kinyan geneva at that point in time, and is not chayav to pay because he incurs capital punishment at the same moment, otherwise would be chayav to pay. But biluachi kanim mashicha. So Amalei. So Abaye said, no problem. We're talking about where he dragged it out b'misna, with a rope, not with due caution, but with a rope. So ananami b'misna kamina. So Bar Matna was not chapping the answer of Abaye. Okay, fine. Throw in a rope. Throw in the rope. But it's the same question. Even if he's dragging out with a rope, it's still a kinyan mashicha, and it's something that he could have lifted. So therefore, why is it then, according to what we just said, that you could be koneh to a kinyan mashicha if it's something which is typically lifted up? So Amalei, so Abaye said, no. Let me explain my answer. I mean, it needs a rope. We're talking about a very heavy wallet. This person has lots and lots of cash on him. So it's a very heavy wallet, and therefore it can't be easily lifted up. And that's why typically it would only be dragged out with a rope. And that's why the kinyan mashicha works. Tash, what? Okay, it's a big case. Big case. So Tashma, the person made it to look like a kiss, but really, if you look very closely, it's really a rollerboard. But he's trying to get away with it. We all know this happens all the time, right? So Tashma, Bishus Mocher, Lo Kana. So here we have another brisa that says in the Rishus of the Mocher, Lo Kana, he does not acquire it. Ad Shiagbiena, Ad Shiyotziena Me Rishuso. So this was one of our cases. If you're acquiring in the domain of the mocher, the lokach does not acquire the item unless he lifts it up. We know that works, or he removes the item through mashicha from the domain of the mocher, as we were discussing. So alma mide the bar hagba ibai bagba kanile ibai b'mashicha kanile. So it sounds like there are these two different options. Either he can lift it up or he can make a king in Mashiach. So we see something that can be acquired through Hagbah can also be acquired through Mashiach. So Amar Nachman Bar Yitzchak, no. Let's start in Ketani. It's talking about two different cases. If it's the sort of thing that typically is lifted, then it can only be acquired through Hagbah. Midid Bar Hagbah is only Bagbah. Midid Bar Mashiach, but something which is typically dragged because it's a little bit on the heavy side. So then, b'mashicha, then the way the Rashbam and Tosas learn it, it can also be acquired through mashicha. Next page, Tashma. 1 second. I made it to the page, so now I can take a break for a second to drink the coffee. Baruch atah Adonai according to your
Two Italian.
This is good. This is good.
Good. Feel bad for
The key is for me not to fall asleep today. Okay. Tashma. Amoche peres l'chavero. So here we have our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says if you sell merchandise, peros, you sell merchandise to your fellow, mashach below madad, kani. So as long as there was a mashicha, even if it hasn't been measured out, they already stipulated a price, good enough, there was a mashicha, that effectuates a kinyan. But wait a second. Peros, the b'nei hagbah ninu. We're talking about what type of merchandise? Peros, talking about fruits of the earth. Fruits of the earth. Generally, what are you talking? A sack of potatoes? These are things that you can generally lift up in the air, right? Uketani, and nonetheless it says b'mashicha that the person mashach b'lomadad kani. The person is kohen b'mashicha. So how does that work according to our rule that we that we have now articulated? So hakam b'mayaskina? No. We're talking about very large bundles of fruit, that are not typically picked up. That's why you could be kohen them b'mashicha b'shlife rabavi. So if that's the case, ihachi ema seifa. So if that's the case, so look at the seifa of the Mishnah, the Tosefta that we had quoted that said halokak pishtan mechavero. Person acquires flax. We know flax are not giant bundles. Flax is generally sold in small bundles. Halokak pishtan mechavero. It says there lo kareze lo kana. So the purchaser does not acquire it. Ad sheyitaltelenu mimakom zeh lemakom acher. Unless he actually lifts it up. And we say mimakom zeh lemakom acher because typically when you're lifting up something, you're lifting it up in order to take it home. But the main thing is that we're saying that it is acquired through hagbah. So atu pishtan b'shlifi harabavi milo avdi. So I don't understand. If we're saying that this is something that can be done through Mashiach, specifically because we're talking about very large bundles, but there are never, aren't there large bundles also where you can put together, even though flax itself is small, but you can have large bundles of flax. So why are we assuming that in the case of the flax, it can only be something which is lifted up? So we say, no, shiny pishtan the mishtamid. Pishtan is different because it's a very slippery. Because of the fact that it's very, very slippery, you can't make big bundles out of a pishtan. You can only make small bundles. And therefore, that's why pishtan specifically requires hagbah. It specifically requires lifting up because there's no such thing as big bundles. But with respect to other payers really could have big bundles. And in the case where it has big bundles, then not only will hagbah work, but even mashicha will work in that case because many people will not typically lift it up in big bundles. Fine. Amalei Rabina Ravashi. Rabina said to Ravashi as follows: Tashma, let's bring a raya from another source. So we have we learn in Maseches Kiddushin, Behema Gasa nicknames b'Mesira. I think it's a Mishnah. Behema Gasa nicknames b'Mesira, Behadaka Behagbah. The Behema Gasa, a large animal, you can so you're not going to be able to pick it up. So simply the handing over of like an elephant, as long as you hand it over, that's good enough to effectuate a kinyan. Behadaka, but if it's a small animal that you can pick up, right? You pick up a little sheep, you pick up a little goat. Who hasn't done that? Behadaka behagbah. So the way in which you acquire that, a small animal, is by lifting it up. Different Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar v'chachamim omrim. I think it starts with who's saying where do you draw the comma over here? It could be Yisrael Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Different Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Period. V'chachamim omrim. V'chachamim, however, say Behema daka b'mashicha. Behema daka is acquired b'mashicha, which presumably means even b'mashicha. So wait a second. Behema daka to bahagbayi. A behema daka is a small animal. So small animals, certainly everybody's able to lift up. So why then, according to our rule, would it be, according to the Chachamim, something that you could purchase through Mashicha? That really, right, you're right. It's only the Chachamim who say this. So why then should it work according to our principle? So the answer is Katani the Kani Mashicha, and the question at the end of the question, and yet we see that you can acquire it through Mashicha. So the answer is Shiny Behema Desircha. Says Behema is different because they try very hard to cling to the ground. Even though the Behema is objectively small, nonetheless, since they're going to cling and pin themselves to the ground, you're going to have to work harder in order to lift them up, since you have to work very hard in order to lift them off of the ground. Therefore, it's not something that we say is darko, only behagba. It might be difficult to do hagba, and that's why we would allow mashicha. But something which could easily be done by everybody behagba, we would not allow mashicha. Right? I'm sorry? It's harder to pick up a shore. Well, it's more sort of a very, it's more difficult when you're lifting up a shore. But here we're saying, even if you're lifting up a set, it's not going to be a piece of cake either. Because a set, even if I'm dealing with a behema daka, they're going to try to cling to the ground. But it also is like a source of embarrassment when you're carrying a very heavy animal. So that's another reason why you have to pay the extra amount. Rabu Shmuel the Amri Travayu. Now, so that's the second discussion that we had today, namely anything which can be easily picked up by Hagba, you can only be Kona Hagba, not by Mashika. The third discussion is, do we say that the Lokeach acquires a little bit at a time, or only when the last drop is poured into the container, does he acquire everything? But up until that point in time, the Mocha can back out. So we said that in general, according to the Brisa, it's a little bit at a time, Rishon Kana. But there's going to be an exception that is brought by Rabbi Shmuel, and that is when the seller explicitly stipulates a certain amount. I'm selling you specifically a core. I want to sell a core, which is 30 sa'ah. It's a large measure. The reason why I want to sell the core is because it's 30. It's 10 apers. A core is 10 apers, right? Gaskalav Yagudu, right? Okay, and it's 10 apers, and it's 30 sa'as. It's 30 sa'as. Of course, 30 sa'as. So a person wants to sell a core bishloshim when the 30, let's say, sellers, 30 coins, animoche, and the reason why he's stipulating this, because he needs the 30 coins. So he can't afford to sell more than one core. So he wants to sell exactly a core, but he can't afford to sell less, because bedafka at this point in time, he needs 30. He needs the 30 coins. So he says, Kor b'shloshim animoche, I don't want to sell less. I don't want to sell more. So up until the point in which the Lokeach has purchased the full core, it could be 29. It could be 29 se'in, that have been filled up, because a core is 30 se'in. That's a core is 10 apos, and an apa is 3 se'ins. So a core is 30 se'ins. So up until the 30th measure, the 30th sa'ah is filled up, the mocha can back out. Apilu b'sa'ah acharona. Core b'shloshim, however, if the seller stipulates, I'm selling a core, this full amount of 30 se'in, the measure of 30 se'in, I'm selling for 30 sla'im, 30 coins, 30 big coins, and he says, sa'ah b'sela, and each sa'ah I'm selling for a seller, so then he's made it clear that he's selling one at a time. And he mocha lak. So then we say, like the price indicated, Rishon Kana, that once each measure is poured, then the person is konus. So Tashma, so that's what Rav and Shmuel want to innovate. We're going to test their theorem to see if it stands up against all of the different brises and mishnayos. So Tashma, im haisa mida shel mehen. So we said in our brisa that if the measure belongs to one of them, so then the general rule is that Rishon Kana, that the purchaser purchases in the appropriate domain. one measure at a time. It could even be the seller's domain, right? If the seller says, Lech kani lach, that I want you to acquire my domain, but he only acquires one at a time. That in this particular case, even though the full measure has not been filled up, and we're talking about where presumably where a certain large measure like a core is being sold, nonetheless, we say that it's being sold one at a time. And this is even where he did not stipulate that I'm selling each measure for a separate coin. So answers the Gemara, yeah, we're talking about a case where it was stipulated. It's just that the price doesn't elaborate. Kigon. That must be the case. To Amole, where the seller says to the purchaser, I am selling you a hin, I'm selling you a certain liquid measure, Bishnei Masara, that has, let's say, 12 lugin, and I'm selling the 12th lugin, Bishnei Masar Sloim, each lug for a seller. Lug basela ani mochelach. So if he says, I'm selling you each lug for a seller, so when he pours every single lug, so then the lokeach acquires it and is obligated to pay the corresponding seller. And it also cannot be something where the mocher backs out. Once that each measure is poured, the lokeach acquires each measure one at a time. How will he know? How will he know exactly how many lugin were poured, right? I mean, what are you going to do? Just estimate? It's a large container. How do I know how many lugin were poured? It looks like it's almost halfway, a little bit more than halfway. I don't know. It's 3 or 4 or 7 that got poured. No, we do know, because this we're talking about where it's like a measuring barrel, like you have a measuring cup, where you have different lines that are drawn on the outside. You have markers. That you had shintos, that you had behin in the measure that they had in the base of Mikdash, that there were measures, and Rav Kahana, according to Tosfos, also applies this to measures that they had outside of the base of Mikdash. So Hakinami, we see there's such a thing as having measures even for regular containers that are used for day-to-day merchandise. Hakinami shintos hayubimidos, that there are measuring vessels, measuring cups, where you can see when the measure is filled up to different markers, so you know whether 1 lug was poured, or 2 lugin, or 8 lugin, or 9 lugin. And as each measure is poured, once it's stipulated that it's going to be a seller for each lug, so then the purchaser purchases one at a time in that case. Tashma, Asoka es a poel. Let's say that I hire a worker. This is a ribis issue. And the people do this all the time. I hire a worker now, but I don't want the worker to start work until like a few months from now. I'm going to pay him at a discount. He's willing to take less now to do more work for me later, so he locks in the job. You're not allowed to do that. It's a ribis. Since he's getting some money up front, so therefore he's willing to give you back more later on. It's considered to be like he's paying back the loan plus more through the additional value of the work that he's going to perform. Lasosimo Lagorin, it's not the harvest season yet. You don't need him to cut your grain, but he's going to work in the harvest season. So Hayom Medinar, right now you hire him for a dinar a day. But if it would be the harvest season, so then he would be hired for 4 dinar in a day. You're getting quite a windfall. Well, the Gorin Yafa seller, he would get a seller which is 4 dinar and 4 dinar in a day. You're not allowed to have him work for you in the harvest season based on that paltry payment, because it's basically ribis. Abol, mutter. However, if you hired him right now to start working today, when it's not yet the harvest season, and he's going to work for a dinar a day, even though it's a low amount, and when the harvest season comes, he's still going to be working for a dinar a day, even though the market rate is 4 dinar in a day. That's perfectly fine. But if you hold, the person is saying basically a dinar a day, so isn't every single day a separate unit? If you hold that when you talk about a core and then you break it up into different units, it's considered to be like a different unit. So how is it considered to be like just one prolonged employment? Every single day is a separate unit of employment. And then when he's going to be working for me in the harvest season, he's going to be doing work where he really should be paid a lot more for a very low sum that I'm giving him, or stipulating that I'm giving him right now, of a dinar a day. That when you're selling a core worth of produce for 30 sa'ah, for a seller, you're selling one at a time. Each sa'ah you're selling for a separate. You're selling for a seller each one. Therefore, you have the right to retract, and each one is considered to be a separate unit of acquisition. So hakinami kama mifsuk. So shouldn't we say over here that it is the same idea. The kama mifsat pasuk, they were separate units. And now when he takes this dinar, all these dinarim that I gave him up front, I gave him 100 dinarim up front, and he's doing the work later on in the harvest season. He's giving me extra work for the money that I paid up front. So why does the prices say that it's mutter? It shouldn't be mutter. It's considered to be an extra premium that's being paid for the fact that I gave him money up front, and I'm waiting for the value of my money to come back. So he's giving me more value 6 months from now, which is ribis. So I'm a Rava, but Tizra Zazuli B'Skius Miasir. So Rava says, what are you talking about? This was an employment arrangement that started from day one, and it continues up until the harvest season. You're allowed to hire somebody at a discount. A person can hire himself out at any price that he wants, and he's starting the work immediately. So Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. Why is it that the case of the Reisha, where he doesn't start the work for 6 months, is no good? In the case of the Seifa, where he starts right away and he got the money up front, but he's doing work for me in the harvest season, which is a more valuable unit of work. He's doing it for the less of money that I gave him, and that's why is it that case is considered to be okay? So the answer is very simple. That the ratio where he doesn't start working for 6 months. So when he's doing this more valuable work product later on, it appears like it's a payment of ribis. But Seifa, the Seifa, where the employment contract begins immediately, and the person's immediately doing the work for me when I'm paying him up front. So Lomexi, so whatever work he does, whether it's today or whether he's continuing the work 6 months from now, Lomexi Kiagonatali, it doesn't look like he's paying me back at a later date for the money up front, because he's paying me back already right away. He's starting to pay me and do the work for the money that I paid up front. And that's the reason why that case is considered to be okay. Okay. And we will stop here. Everybody have a wonderful day. Okay.